Hello and welcome to another episode of Bravo Outsider. I'm super excited to welcome back our guest host, Sandy Klowak, once again. Sandy, how's it going?
Going well. Excited to be here yet again and chat Housewives.
Yeah. We've got a really fun show this week. Each week we bring on an outsider who doesn't follow the show to get their takes on the episode. This week I am super stoked to welcome my friend Billy Chung.
She's busted, but she gets it done.
Wow, that has to be one that you wrote yourself, right? That's not a
yeah, is that not what everyone does? Do people kind of
people
survey taglines? Yeah.
No, some people will like draw a tagline from like one of the housewives, like whatever they use,
right,
and then other people will write their own. But yeah, that's amazing. That is probably one of the best of the taglines that someone has written themselves.
Was going to do an alternative of I don't know how she does it. She doesn't. But I felt like that didn't roll off the tongue so well. So I was like, okay, that's good.
Awesome. Well, we usually like to start off by asking our guests what their past experience with reality television is, and if they've watched any Bravo shows before. Do you want to give everyone a little bit of a background?
Yeah, totally. I think growing up, I definitely watched the usual suspects of Survivor, Temptation Island, and not a lot. Like, my family wasn't extremely exposed to reality TV. We, our household had one of those satellite dishes. I'm not sure if you guys recall any of those, but it's one of those Bell satellite dishes because my family liked to watch a lot of Asian channels. So that was the only thing that you would kind of capture those channels on. And so that was like the majority of our entertainment growing up. And I would watch, like shows like Friends and such, but none of them were really reality TV show based. Then there was a huge lapse in my life where I just didn't watch any of it until like recently in my adulthood, where I'm watching like RuPaul's Drag Race, a bit of stuff on Netflix. I definitely didn't watch a lot of Bravo in general, like growing up. So it was actually really fun for me to even venture into the Real Housewives world, but even just Google and figure out the network and see how much they're producing. So that's my total exposure to it.
Yeah, Bravo had a bit of like a format shift where prior to getting into reality TV, they were doing shows like Inside the Actors Studio with James Lipton, and it was very like focused on more like high art. And right now, I would argue that it is again focused on high art because I consider Real Housewives to be high art. But it made a huge change in format, and they put out both like Project Runway and Queer Eye were their two like huge hits that really changed their format in order to like get into reality TV. And they now have so many hits like Real Housewives, Vanderpump Rules, Below Deck. All these shows are really big and have a very like rabid following, and they're, in my opinion, the best in the game at putting these together. Like, if you compare something like Real Housewives or Vanderpump Rules versus something like the Bachelor, I think there's really no comparison. And maybe that's not a fair like comparison, just because the Bachelor is more of a structured competition show and Real Housewives is an unstructured reality show. But still, I think the storytelling on Bravo is second to none.
It's actually kind of, sorry, this is kind of embarrassing. Now that you've mentioned Queer Eye and Project Runway, I definitely watched Bravo shows growing up. I did watch both of those, but I didn't realize they were Bravo, and that's how like, clueless I was. I was like, oh, I guess it's just TV.
Yeah. Well, Project Runway was off of Bravo for a while, and it was on one of like the main networks, probably NBC, and then it came back to Bravo.
Right.
But yeah, that really like kicked off their shift towards reality TV. And there was like a long time where Inside the Actors Studio was running on Bravo while they were also doing Real Housewives. And you could see, if you look on YouTube for some of their like Summer of Bravo promos, there's all these like celebrities from Bravo that are, doing these like wacky things. Like there's an Olympics themed one, or there's like a deserted island themed one where they've got all these like Real Housewives and their other reality personalities that are, doing goofy things in front of a green screen, basically. But James Lipton is in them as well, like just alongside all these Real Housewives, and it's a really funny contrast. And it's fun to see him like have fun with that.
It's also pretty amazing, even just the conception of like, I guess that's every reality TV show, but when you put a bunch of characters together and script it and see what happens. Like I kind of want to go back and watch the first couple of seasons and see like how it's matured or how the editing has changed or how they choose to edit has changed. I feel like that'd be really fascinating to just see.
Yeah, for sure. Like the first couple seasons of Real Housewives of Orange County definitely have like a little bit different of a vibe from what I've seen. I haven't watched them like completely all the way through.
Right.
But
How dare you.
it's definitely like doesn't have the kind of mature like production
Right.
and
Yeah.
the like storytelling that it does now.
So what? Well, like, and not to prolong this, but I'm just curious. Which was the original franchise of them all? Like of the.
Real Housewives of Orange County.
Oh, that's interesting because I thought New York was the original one. And I don't know why I thought that. I think it's just because I don't know. I don't know. I actually thought that, but yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah. I mean, so today we're talking about the most recent episode of Real Housewives of Orange County and an older episode of Real Housewives of New
Right.
York, just because it was the holidays down in the States. So Atlanta and Atlanta didn't air, and there's
Right.
a reboot of Real Housewives of New York that is about to premiere. So we thought it would be a really good, it would be really fun to look at an old episode of Real Housewives of New York from a
For sure.
season that I think is amazing. Like you could teach a class on this season of Real Housewives of New York. And just as a bit of a lead in, but one thing that we do like to do is have a roundtable discussion about some sort of topic as it relates to Real Housewives or reality TV. And Billy, since you're an architect, I thought it would be really fun to have you on to talk about something I'm really eager to talk about. And, you know, Orange County and New York are really polar opposites in
Yeah.
terms of this, but physical spaces. And I think like in any media or art that we consume, the physical space that it's set in has a huge impact on a lot of aspects of the art. And so I'm assuming that this is, physical spaces is something that you think about a lot in your job. I'm assuming at least.
Kind of. No, but yeah. Imagine like, no, I do not do that.
Yeah.
It's been a huge mistake.
Yeah, you got the wrong guy.
But I'm wondering if that kind of feeds into the perspective that you have when you are consuming art or media. Like, do you consider the physical spaces a lot more than, the average person does, do you think?
I think I do, and I think so. Like personally, I love anything set in New York. So just because of the streets, kind of the metropolitan setting, it always like I always romanticize that for the better, for the worse. And particularly for the shows, I thought they were actually quite different in sense of like the scale of gatherings or even just like the events that they can move through. And I think maybe because the episode that we watched, Orange County, they were in Montana, so I don't think they were actually in their usual setting. Whereas I found in New York, it was a lot more casual the way they would move through cities. They would go from someone's office to like someone's home, and then there would kind of be improvised like these gallery settings where they had openings randomly and people would just show up. And I thought that was a really different setup than this particular episode with the Real Housewives of Orange County, because I thought Orange County was much more event-based and activity-based. Like it was almost like a Survivor kind of, like they almost had challenges where they showed up to a farm and they had to like clean out a farm or they clean out a ranch. Whereas the other one, whereas New York was very much just like, just like move around the city and you go to events. And like that's the first thing I noticed. It was really that's like the differences I immediately noticed. But I am curious in Orange County what happens when they actually move back to their homes and they're more in their usual settings. If it's similar to New York, where they kind of just go to one event to another in a very casual manner, or is it still as organized and activity based?
I think it's still more than the others because, and I'm trying to recall earlier in the show in OC, but at least lately, there's a few factors. I think that the organic nature that you're getting at, Billy, it really stands out to me. New York is my favorite show by far, and it's just so real. Like as you said, they're going place to place. There are real people. They are running into real people, which causes real drama, like that guy that we'll definitely talk about later on. And in the other shows, it's kind of just like there's nothing organic about it sometimes. So they do just say, we're gonna go play frisbee golf. We're going to go to do yoga here. We're going to go
Right, yeah.
run around in big bubble suits for whatever reason. Like it's kind of, that's what they throw in when it's happening less organically. So I think that's very accurate, even though the trips are even more so like that, more extreme. But I think it's fair to make that comparison.
And it's funny because like even in the New York episode, there were settings where some of the characters' personality can extend into their space. Like in this particular episode, they were in Bethany's office, and you know, when you're in these offices, it just reminds me of like Hell on Earth. Like you kind of question if these are actual offices. And in Bethany's office, she sprinkles the whole thing with like dashes of red that's like reminiscent of like the Target red, and you're like, oh, these are real. But they kind of make notes about it. It's like, oh, and your brand's red. I'm just like, oh, it's like kind of, I like how it kind of like creates like almost like a villain setting for Bethany, where it's like, come to, like I summon you, and then they, we'll get into this a little bit more, but they then confront each other in this setting. I'm like, oh, this is kind of, it's like a fun use of a set.
Yeah, totally. I think you touched on something about like the fluidity of Real Housewives of New York and how it does feel like the show kind of moves very organically from like setting to setting. And yeah, you're totally right that that's not something that we see on Orange County very much when it's, you know, home and not on a trip. I wonder how much like the, you know, the suburban design of Orange County has an impact on that atmosphere.
It's funny because I also I was suspecting that too, that like if you were to kind of organize a shoot, like any sort of shooting, like you would have to actually get the whole crew there, and you have to organize them in cars and drive there. So it's not like someone can just take a cab and be like, yo, we need you in the scene, can you come? But like you really have to get everyone there. So I think the sequencing of that and then the logistics of actually getting those scenes ready could impact that you have to just kind of make it a bit more structured to kind of capture enough content. And whereas I think in New York it was a little bit different, people can exit scenes or kind of leave conflict just via a cab, which they often do. And maybe that plays into it as well, I think.
That's such a good point.
Yeah, totally.
Because there's always the Sprinter van or whatever that's taking them, all these suburban people everywhere. The only way they can really escape is to like go in the van and hide out, or call their own Sprinter van to take them away. And that really affects the dynamic of things.
Because even in the Orange County episode, again, we'll go into this a little bit more, like some of the way they escape conflict was to go into their own Jeep and kind of cry or hide from conflict. And the vehicle, like, and their private vehicles become the thing they can like retrieve to. And like in a way, they're almost like forced to confront the issues a bit more immediately because they have nowhere to hide. It's like, okay, there's only so far you can go on this field. You gotta just like, and then another lady would kind of go after them. That, to your point, I think that it's kind of been true.
Totally. One thing that I was like kind of curious about, and when I'm watching these shows, I can't help but like, you know, look for, you know, any sort of metaphor or symbolism or whatever. And when I was thinking about like the physical settings and trying to, you know, make connections there, I was thinking like, you know, New York, you're thinking of like you've got all these tall buildings, and it's very like there's this aspirational. It's a very like a vertical social. It's a very vertical social show. Like we saw in this episode, like Sonia talking about how she has to like get back to where she was. And one thing on Real Housewives of New York, we see like Ramona is constantly trying to like Ramona and social climb. And so there's a lot of like verticality in that sense to New York, where You don't really see that as much on Real Housewives of Orange County, where it's a little bit more flat in terms of the social space that they are operating in. And I would say that, like, a dominant theme within Orange County, maybe more so than other Real Housewives, is like a social conformity, like being able to conform. And when you think about like suburban design, the intention or the lack of intention surrounding it, I'm curious as to what kind of informs the suburban design space, and whether like conforming to the rest of your neighborhood is a strong consideration when you'd be designing a house for a suburban environment.
Right. I think that's interesting as an observation. I think suburbia emerged as this whole movement where there was this idea of white flight, where a lot of actually Caucasian families left the downtown, as the downtown was unfortunately stigmatized with things such as crime and unemployment and such in all through America. So suburban design has always been based on almost these garden state ideas, where it's like quite pleasant. They're very like meandering. They're all about wandering. It's definitely kind of about these white picket fence and safety mindsets, which I think it kind of actually does parallel what they're doing, because so much of that is about kind of recreational leisure settings. And like when you look at OC as an episode, they are very like ladies who will go out to these ranches and kind of bond through recreational activities. Whereas in New York, the entrepreneurial and the kind of business nature of the cast does come through a lot of even the way they host events. Like Bethany would host like a launch where it's just like her showcasing her business plan to a bunch of potential investors. I believe it's a previous episode. And so much of the way they bond and the way they create relationships is that social ladder that you're commenting on. So I think they do create different settings and different activity based types for them to bond. And even if you look at OC, like I feel like particularly for this episode, a lot of the relationships were like this inner circle. It was very much about them. There were very few kind of outside characters that can just kind of come in. Like even when the boyfriends or the partners entered scenes, they were just kind of via a camera or a phone or some sort of digital device that was really brief. Whereas in New York, the way they were structured, there were kind of all these potential business partners that can come in. There were kind of these satellite relationships that were about climbing the social ladder, that were about building their empire. And a lot of the ladies' main, their identity was also quite projected in their business or in the way they would kind of build connections, like the Countess, and like she can connect you with this person,
right?
Or emulating each other in the way they would kind of build their business empire. So I feel like that's kind of the difference in the way they, like a suburban setting would kind of create that for one show, whereas like a city setting creates a different dynamic for the others.
Yeah, totally. That makes total sense. Did either of you guys have any other thoughts in terms of like how setting might inform these shows before we move on?
I wanted to talk a little bit about houses and how those factor into the plots of these shows. I find that on OC and a lot of other sort of franchises where they have the McMansion type homes, as we kind of touched on last week, it factors in a lot for some of the women. We see Heather on OC having like entire plot lines just building this disgustingly large and expensive house, and pretty boring, like for me at least. And then there was Shannon long ago when she had her original house with her husband. She's now divorced, and it was like specially built. They're all like custom built, right? Everyone's building a house. You see that on a lot of the different shows. And she built it to, I don't know, have like the, the right perfectly designed vibes and orientation. I think she had like crystals built into it, or just all sorts of things. Yeah. So it's really important to them. It's like a value that they want to show off is important to them, that they have these really big custom houses. And like, to me, it feels gross. Like I'm interested in a general sense, but I'm also not, because it's not what is actually interesting. But it's interesting that it's important to them. And then if you contrast that with New York, they take a very different perspective on presenting where people live. For one thing, it's not, I wouldn't say it's as central because, again, as you said, Billy, there's so much more going on. It's so vibrant. It's just happening. And sure, if it becomes a bit of a plot line, that's great. For Sonia, it's been a plot line. And I love Sonia. She's one of my favorite, all-time favorites as well. She has this townhouse, which was featured well in this episode. This townhouse has absolutely been a plot. Either she's trying to keep it and not lose it, or she's trying to rent it out and no one wants to live there, or she's trying to fix all the leaky pipes that are constantly going, or cleaning dog poop off every section of the house from her dog. It's always kind of this comedic, like joking thing where she looks a little nuts, as she always does, and she's really attached to this townhouse. So that's one that I find interesting on New York, but it's such a different angle. Like, it's not aspirational per se, even though I'm sure it costs so much money and all this, but it's always like the edit is that it's a dump and she's kind of a loser and no matter what's going on with her house, it's not really very glamorous. So I find that interesting. And I find that very compelling. So yeah.
That's actually such an interesting, I unfortunately didn't watch more of the OC to register that. And I should have just probably picked up that they probably own these large real estates, which I just didn't see in this episode. And that's so fascinating because so much about suburbia is about that quote unquote idea of a safety, like this idea of like you close your doors and you're in your own private space, and that becomes your way to protect yourself, to mediate, to kind of reinforce a sense of self as this built environment that you created. And for them, it's extremely large McMansions that help them showcase wealth, that reinforces their identity. Whereas in New York, you can just assume that anyone owning a property is probably like a hustle to even get there and to kind of acquire that. But then, like, when I first read the kind of theme of this title, I thought you meant physical space as in like people's personal bubbles. Like, so like physical space as in like how much they actually confront each other's physical space, like they literally are up in each other's businesses, and kind of break that bubble and burst that bubble so often. And where in the OC, it sounds like you can like actually physically construct that bubble as like your McMansion and close off the door. Whereas in New York, because the flats are so small, and sometimes even if you host people in your house, like you have to really unfold your private space to the city to actually, like you actually have to dwell in the city for you to have the same access to like retreats, or like you might have to go to a spa instead of go to your bedroom. You may not have a pool. You might have to go to like a public space. So like your physical space does have to unfold into the city a lot more. Whereas in OC, it sounds like you can just build your own thing. Everything is there and it's your own mecca. It's almost like your own monument to yourself.
Yeah, that's really interesting because, like if you're in a very dense city environment like New York, you don't have a yard. You go to the park, right?
Yeah.
And I think like one of the things that's really interesting about, the actual residences that people have, like you said, Sandy, in Orange County and a lot of these other areas where they've got lots of space, they're able to like build and construct whatever they think best reflects their personalities. Whereas in New York, it's a hustle to, like, to your point, Billy, to really carve out your own space, and you have to be like fluid and find a crack and like expand into it, and like that results in some awkward and hard edges, both like in your personality because of how you've had to operate in order to like make your way up socially within New York, but also, we see awkwardly shaped residences in New York all the time. Like, I think like Carol's place is kind of like awkwardly constructed. There's like a loft. It's nice, but it's like, if you had a blank canvas, that's not exactly the layout that you would have. And also in this episode, we saw Jules' apartment, which has like a TV that's mounted in her like hallway. That's like a really awkward position, but you just have to like find whatever nook you can and expand into it and keep kind of like iterating on that process to carve out what becomes your home. And I think that, that's similar to the, the personality traits that like make you successful within that, such a dense urban environment.
Totally. And you can also see the reflection in what you said, Billy, on how they act and how that comes into their interactions on OC. It's not to say they never get in each other's faces, but they're reserved. They have that built-in bubble. They're used to that suburban bubble of personal space. Whereas even on this episode of New York, we saw John putting his hand in Ramona's face, just getting this physical space being crushed. We saw that. We saw the Ray, the whatever drunk or high or whatever guy that is in love with Luann, just going really close to, I think it was Sonia when he was trying to talk to her. And it was like, that's everywhere. And so that really reflects in their interactions, which is really interesting.
It's funny because this conversation reminds me of a movie called Crash. I've never, if you guys ever watched it, but it's Crash with Sandra Bullock and a bunch of other people. But this is not the theme, but like the way I watched it was that it was about LA. It was very much about people who drove cars. And so, and I may not be recalling this correctly, so whoever's listening, and if I misremember the movie, please don't call me out on it. But it was a lot about people moving through the city via their cars, their own private space. And they don't really ever confront each other, because if you have the ability to just like close your world off in your home, in your car, you can move through like these completely privatized mindsets, like from one space to another without ever actually having to deal with your community or anyone else. And so in Crash, there are scenes where some of these relationships kind of start to break and start to kind of the boundaries start to loosen up a bit, and you see characters and social classes confronting each other. So I find that like it seems like it's a good mirror of both of these societies, OC and NYC, whereas it seems like OC is very much about kind of constructing these like isolated bubbles of interaction of the ladies, of the family, but it's like very well curated within their own mindset. Whereas in New York, you get these kind of interactions that you don't expect. Even at the gallery opening, I think there was a guy called Ray. I forgot his name, but Ray, he was definitely, he was my favorite character in that episode. He was definitely a little bit tipsy during the whole gallery setting, and they kind of got into this huge dispute where I suspect that would never really happen if you can just go from your home to your car to a thing, you know who's going to be there, you know who's on the invite list, and then you leave that whole event and then you just go home again. And I think that's why I find like there, for me, I just incline towards the New York setting a little bit more.
Totally.
Yeah, for sure.
I agree.
I think it's also like interesting how, the spaces that you're operating in also like inform kind of tonally what we get from the storytelling, not just from a personality perspective. And I think it was interesting when we watched this episode of Orange County, when it's set on this ranch, it does seem a lot more like a Western. They impart this like kind of a lot of these Western tropes within the episode, where we saw like the confrontation that we caught the tail end of at the beginning of this Orange County episode, but was more present in the previous episode, where we've got Taylor and Heather kind of going head to head in the saloon, and they've got they're like squaring off their eyes and like squinting, and even down to like Heather wearing the white cowboy hat, which in Westerns typically symbolizes like the hero, and Taylor having the black hat when she's coming in to stir shit up. I just thought that it was really interesting that we see these tropes like extracted from other like notable work that exists within spaces similar to this, and are able to project that on these shows and like see new nuance, whether it's intentional or not. It's still like something that adds to the experience of engaging with it. I think
it definitely adds like a Disney quality to it, like the Disneyfication of that particular ranch setting, just because they were always in these cowboy attires that it did take like it was like you did have to kind of like project yourself into that world, particularly in this episode. But I wonder if those tropes also exist in the New York City settings, because again, I'm thinking of the gallery opening where you kind of have to like dress in your mink and you have to kind of play up these these regales of wealth to like kind of be in those settings, or there were kind of cocktail dresses and like various things that like the people who run a business would always kind of wear a blazer. Like there were these things that they also had to play into to reinforce that character and reinforce that fantasy of being in New York, where you have this like whole like you go from day to night, you can just wear the same outfit but you throw a blazer on. Like these kind of like narratives that you're told. But yeah,
Yeah, I think like especially when I think about like New York in things like film, for example, I feel like whenever you've got something that is set in New York, it's very intentional. Like it's very clearly like New York because it's either operating in like this high class socialite like stratosphere or like finance or I or they're using like the personality that city has as like a character, like you see on Sex and the City, or another example that I personally love is NYPD Blue, which really really brings out the personality of that city, even though I think it was mostly shot in Los Angeles, but they do a great job of like highlighting the New York City personality within that show. It seems like a very like intentional setting, and you do get that exact same vibe when you're watching Real Housewives of New York, just in how they highlight the areas, how they talk about the geography of the city, like the various like neighborhoods and boroughs. And there's even, I remember like conversations where they're talking about various like street numbers and like what happens higher than this number, or what happens below like, this number, sort of thing, like where things take place on the grid of New York. And that also goes right down to like informing where Dorinda and Ramona had a conversation during this episode, where Dorinda intentionally chose the restaurant because it was in the neighborhood where they became friends, and like it's where their kids went to school, and she used that space and that neighborhood as a way to kind of ground her like back to like where let's get back to our roots and let's like rehabilitate this. And I don't know, I just think there's so many possibilities for like physical storytelling within New York. That's really
and it's like it's actually really funny when you're saying that. It actually, I think that picking up on the idea of a physical space and the paralleling of how they climb the social ladder is actually much more immediate, because like to be on Upper East Side means something, like Lower Manhattan means something, like to kind of immediately reference the neighborhood or be able to name certain neighborhoods, like these are the areas I visit, really does signify your social class, particularly when you talk about, I'm sure this is not just New York based, but when you talk about what areas your kids go to school, I feel like that's a huge, like almost subtle flex of wealth or subtle flex of well-being. Like, oh, those are the schools associated with this area, and these are not. And I find like the grid really does become like the matrix that like signifies all those ideas of wealth, where you need to move to, where social mobility needs to be, and how you have to kind of exist on Manhattan to be someone that's influential. I haven't watched enough of the Orange County version of that, but I suspect there must be a similar idea that parallels that. Like,
I think it's a little less so, like in terms of how the geography informs the storytelling on Orange County. Certainly a lot less than New York. Maybe not. New Jersey is another franchise where I think the geography of New Jersey is like a very big component of the show, both talking about the neighborhoods or the like the suburbs and cities that they live in within New Jersey, but also just like how the culture of the area informs the content. But Orange County, I feel like it has substantially a lot less than other shows, at least compared to the East Coast shows.
Right.
I think on OC, I find sometimes they're building houses and then they'll be like, well, I'm building next to you. And then they'll be like, well, I'm actually moving to somewhere else. And I can't keep track of where they're moving and where they're building. But it seems like there's a little bit of that, but it might be so specific that it wouldn't like be relatable for a larger audience. And whereas obviously New York, everyone can kind of get that. And I remember when Alex in New York, she lived in Brooklyn, and everyone was just appalled that they had to go to Brooklyn for a party, stuff like that. So it's a little more understandable for people.
And that is a remnant, like that is the idea of a suburb, right? There is this kind of like sameness that's not locale driven in a suburb. Like if you drive through any suburbia, even the older ones, like there are specific like housing types that they repeat to create this idea of a neighborhood. Like the idea of a neighborhood is like we are all in a suburb, I mean, we're all kind of a same income level, same family values, same everything. We drive the same car, we own the same amount of cars, we have the same backyard. And I think that renders this like monotonous landscape that's like very hard to actually pin down. Like you can take a shot of any suburb in the States and it would be quite hard pressing for you to like actually name where they are. Whereas in New York, you get these various immediate landmarks. Like you get you get Central Park, you get the museums, you get the Guggenheim museums. Like there are things that really help ground and help you locate where you are. Whereas maybe in Orange County that matters a bit less because so much of it is kind of like these constructed worlds of like going to a ranch, coming to my mansion, and it's in a way almost like more assembled and much more choreographed in that sense.
Totally.
Yeah, I think there's like just not as many like points of reference, within Orange County to really try to like ground yourself within that geography. But I feel like even in like New Jersey, I mean, New York has the advantage of it's a very high profile city that like people know all these landmarks, even if they haven't been there, they can kind of like they understand them. But even like a place like New Jersey, I think the geography of that plays into things in a way that is a lot more substantial than Orange County. Even if you're not familiar with the area, the way they talk about the different areas that they live in, you can kind of project a map and like kind of see the hot spots and cold spots of where's desirable and what it means to be here and what it means to be there.
I wonder for Orange County if it has more relationship to like the coast, like because there is like a Golden Coast in that area that like maybe you are closer to the water versus you're away from the water, like because like any sort of view of water would signify a lot of wealth, and especially if you can like buy private land in those settings. So I do wonder maybe it's more like about the natural features of that whole area as opposed to like neighborhood or landmark based things.
Yeah, for sure. I do want to get into our recaps. Did you guys have any final thoughts before we move on?
Good.
No, I actually, I mean, before I get to I've never really watched these shows before, so I did try to watch it through the lens of like, I wonder which scenes I would have a good time in, like which scenes I would love to be in. And so there were a couple, but I would wait until the episodes, but that's kind of how I like watched it through.
Okay, well, yeah, let's dive in. Which of these episodes would you have more fun in? We'll start there.
I think I would have fun in both episodes, but there were friendships that I definitely bonded closer with. Like in the New York franchise, I really loved it. And excuse me if I forget some of the character names, just because there were cast members, so I might get them mixed up. But there was a scene in the New York episode where they were at this place called Sushi Rocks. Where they were just kind of having like this really good time, and the way this described the show was just kind of like at Sushi Rocks, anything goes. You can eat, you can dance, you can just do whatever. And then they eventually turned the conversation about one of the ladies being a squirter. And I was like, you know what, like I would kind of enjoy this. Like I kind of love the idea of myself having a martini, vibing next to someone having raw fish, just grabbing fish and talking about sex. I'm like, hey, I can see myself totally being into that. Whereas in the OC, the friendships and the kind of the love I liked a lot was between, I think it's Tamara and Shannon, when they were they had a couple incidents and a couple moments that were really endearing. Like one is when they were like just in one of the cottages or one of the houses, and they're throwing gummy bears at each other, and they just got wasted, and they were just on the floor. And I'm just like, okay, this is like really cute, and I could totally want to be in this. And they had this thing that kept alluding to their like 2.5 years past. Of like some drama that I didn't fully figure out what it was. But I'm like, hey, I would love to be here. And then even like the little moments, they were kind of the comedic points of this episode. I found like even when moments were really tense, there were moments between Shannon and Tamara where she would just cut her belt off or like cut her jeans apart just so she can get out of her pants and go pee. I'm like, oh, like I love those friendships where you can sense that there's a past. They're trying to overcome something, but then they're still able to just like get together, get wasted, and have a really good time. And those are the moments I really loved in both of the shows. Of course, there was all the drama as well, but like when it's like really endearing, that's when I really enjoyed the show.
Yeah. Well, let's start with Orange County then. You touched on this conflict that Tamara and Shannon are overcoming, and I agree. This is like kind of a compelling scene for me. Just like the sort of the venting off of this like built up pressure from all this tension that these two good friends have had over the course of how the 2.5 years or whatever. I really loved this atmosphere. Like you can kind of feel the energy like lifting and them getting back to this lighter relationship. I thought it was really interesting or really nice to see, and also interesting from the perspective of how it is going to change the social makeup of the group.
I couldn't quite figure out the siding of the whole group, to be honest. I came out the episode really thinking I had this. I guess that whole episode for me, the villain was Gina, and I'm not sure if everyone agrees. Maybe.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Because she just kept entering these situations where she would just spill the tea and try to stir things up. I'm like, I don't know if I like this about you. I feel like you're kind of just like, it's not factual. It was all about like misquoting people. I'm like, I don't really like Gina. I feel like she just kind of came in there and like caused a lot of shit. And I also felt really bad for Jen. I just felt like everyone's all pro business, especially towards the end of this episode where they had this kind of like confrontation with her where everyone just kind of asked her about her own infidelity and her own relationships. Like, well, I don't know if ultimately she has to answer to any of this. Like, I feel she could have just done her own thing and she didn't have to explain herself. But I just couldn't quite figure out the siding of all the characters because there was a lot of past relationships I couldn't follow.
Yeah. It's interesting that you picked up on Gina being the villain. My final note after watching this show was, wow, Gina is having such a great season. And I mean, the fact that she like might be considered a villain, that would not change that for me. Like, I think I love villains, and so that's one of the things that's most compelling. But villain is not something that I really got from what she was doing. I feel like she's operating very like strategically, socially, and she's also someone that is like kind of playing from behind. Like, she is not a top dog here at all. I think that what she has been doing with Heather is pretty smart, even if it doesn't like necessarily play out. It kind of like backfires in this episode that we see, but she's trying to align herself with Heather, especially on this trip, because Emily, who is one of her like traditional allies, is not there.
Right.
But I think that her, talking with Heather in the shit truck that they were scooping out, I thought that this was smart, and I thought that her read was good. Like, this was an opportunity to like show Heather that she had her back and like strengthen that relationship. And also just like, I mean, real talk, when I think it was Gina that said, like, if they're in a restaurant pulling up your IMDb, they're not doing it to say nice things. Like, they're doing it to be catty. And so, like, just like think about that. And then I thought she really capped it off nicely, and in a really aware way by being like, but you know what? If you are fine with how things are and you want to drop it, I'm like totally willing to drop it. Like, she is kind of like putting herself out there for Heather, being like, look, I got your back. This is how I see things potentially being framed. I'm willing to, go after Tamara and Taylor over this and be on your side for it. But if that's not how you want to play this, I'll do whatever you want. Like, strategically, the ball's in your court, and I'm willing to be on your side. And Heather ends up throwing this away during the course of the episode. She immediately rats Gina out to Shannon, which, like, that seems like a more villainous thing in my opinion. But also, I think that was actually a smart thing for Heather to do. Like, when I saw this, I was like, ugh. But also, that's smart, because Heather this whole season has been really working hard to try to isolate Tamara as like an ally, because Tamara is coming back after a long period of being off the show, and Tamara is like an all-star, one of the all-time greatest housewives, and someone that you definitely want on your side.
Right.
And so to put this out there and use this piece of information as a way to hopefully get Tamara to align with her, I think that was smart for her to do. I think she maybe misread it a little bit, because I feel like that ship has sailed now that we see Shannon and Tamara come back together and, really make up. I think it's going to be too hard to penetrate that bond. You're never going to be like above Shannon if she's aligned with Tamara. So, but I don't blame her for trying and basically doing a very similar thing to what Gina was doing by bringing this information and like selling her out. And I think that when we got to that final scene with the camping, I think that Heather realized that her read was wrong. And I think she did a really great job of trying to make things up with Gina when Gina was like clearly affected by this. Right. Immediately, like, Heather's like by her side and being like taking her side and being like, okay, this, that's not okay. I would be upset about that too. And like following her out, because she saw that, this relationship with Gina is potentially jeopardized. And there's like huge like deck reshuffling that is happening during this scene, because when Gina starts talking to having the conflict with Tamara, then Jen kind of like pipes up on Gina's side,
right,
and is like, that this doesn't really make sense to me, or whatever it is that she says. She makes it clear that she's like, siding with Gina and taking her side, and immediately that's when Tamara knows that she's got this trump card that she can play, where it's this infidelity that Gina's going to be like immediately affected by, and completely sever that relationship, so that she's got all these different fronts isolated as opposed to a united front that she's dealing with.
And why was Gina so affected by Jen's infidelity? That's where I maybe missed something.
So her ex cheated on her, and she is clearly just like not.
She's triggered by that.
Processing it.
That's I also loved it when Heather did follow Gina to the car in the very end, and I think Gina was about to make a call to her current boyfriend, and Heather was just like, "No, you're not going to do that. You're not going to do that, and I'm going to tell you why." But I'm also just like, I feel like you're making this up as you're going along. I feel like you don't. Like, I know, like, she just had a really long pause. I'm like,
and I'll figure it out in 30 seconds.
I'm like, and she just hung up on the guy. It's like, and I'll tell you why. I'm going to tell you why right now. I'm about to tell you why. Are you ready for me to tell you why? Just like, this is a really long lead in.
And we see that Gina obviously did not take her advice, and I'm kind of interested in that choice. Like, I was when Heather was giving that advice, I was like, I don't know, but then I was like, maybe that's good advice, but I'm kind of torn on that one. But Gina definitely didn't like it, so I guess didn't go over well.
Because Heather's advice to Gina was not to run to her current boyfriend, right? Like to not disclose too much about her ex relationship, because that would kind of signify that Gina is not over the ex, and that might kind of create turmoil in the current relationship.
Or at least expose that she is ongoingly very upset about this. I'm sure he knows all about it, but that this is triggering her on like a nightly basis because of what her ex did, that he might start to think she's not over her ex or whatever.
Right.
Yeah, I feel like this is like a bit. Well, I think this is Heather being opportunistic and trying to make a social play and like align herself. So I think that's like at the foremost, that's what it is. But also, I feel like this advice is a little bit, informed by the generational gap between Gina and Heather.
Totally.
Like, this is definitely something that, someone from Heather's generation, like, you can hear that voice and being like, oh, you don't want to push your partner away with this, as opposed to like,
open up to them.
I feel like our generation is a lot more emotionally open. And so it'd be like, okay, yeah, obviously you want to talk to your partner about what's impacting you emotionally. You don't want to just like, shove that down. But this was a really hilarious moment when Gina's like dialing and it's ringing, and Heather grabs the phone and it's like, oh no, she's okay. We'll call you back. Like,
the poor partner,
getting a phone call.
Yeah, he's just like, okay.
Despite all the partners mostly being assholes, it's like, okay, bye.
Like, this was my scene this week. Come on. Yeah. But it was interesting watching Heather, as you said, Craig, like realize, I mean, she even had it in her confessional. She was like, oh, I hope I don't get left out now that Tamara and Shannon are together. And then there's a few moments where you could really actually see, and I kind of could relate from like, feeling left out in elementary school. She was kind of trying to be goofy with them. And they were just like not paying attention to her. And she was just kind of cut out all of a sudden. And I kind of felt for her, but it makes sense that she should, as you very well explained the dynamic and what's going on here and how things are reshuffling. So it's going to be interesting to watch how that goes.
Craig, you are much more observational than me, just being a first-time exposure. I feel like if I wrote The Real Housewives, they would just like kind of be making pancakes and like having a really good time and listening to Dolly Parton the whole day, and then like no one's gonna watch anything. I'm like, why don't we just all get along and like eat banana and pancakes, and it's gonna be great. Which is like not what the show.
No, it is super interesting, and this is like really what I was hoping for with like Tamara coming back in, is that it was going to shake things up in this way and see how things land, because I think you just need that to happen and change these dynamics, and so it's interesting to see this happen. I'd be curious to how this would be different if Emily was there, because Gina and Emily, they kind of come together quite a bit, especially on trips. They're like inseparable on trips. So I feel like we might not have got this if Emily was there. Like Gina would not be as compelled to try to bring Heather into the fold. So I'm just really glad that this played out the way it did.
I did make a note in this episode where I just wrote in caps, who was Emily? Because she was just not invited. But I actually kind of liked her character, especially when she showed shots of her younger modeling years, and it was just kind of these catalogs. I'm just like, I kind of love your vibe. I kind of want to know a bit more about you, and your child seems like a monster. Like, I want to know like how you handle this world of Housewives. And I was sad that she wasn't there. And I didn't know her and Gina came in as a package. So it's like good to hear that Gina has a bit has other allies that she can draw upon.
Yeah, I'd say it's not like as like strong of a package as some of the other pairs we see, but it is kind of a loose pair. They came on the show at the same time, and that really like plays into this as well. But I mentally just have a really strong association between the two of them. But we see it play out where it's not as like tight as it, as as it is in my head.
So what is, like, I guess, to redirect some attention to the other characters, I was also trying to understand Jen's history with the show, because she was quite focused on this episode, whereas her own, her private businesses were kind of like being talked about, and everyone was like, should we tell her, should we not tell her, like, does she often get kind of not picked on per se, but like do the ladies kind of like pay her this much attention in general, or how does that usually, how has she played out as a character in the season as well?
So this is her first season, so she's brand new.
Okay,
so that's kind of like what we're seeing is, how is she going to fit into this group? Is she going to be, whose ally is she going to be? Is she even going to be a useful ally,
right,
or is she just like chum in the water, and they're going to use her infidelity as something to like pick apart, and then she doesn't have anything to carry her forward, so she'll be a one and done. At least I think that's how it's going to play out. I think that she's not bringing anything, and I think she's going to be,
I think she's just too apologetic for what she's doing. I mean, just don't let them pick on you like that. Like, if they're going to come at you at this like ring of fire, just like, of course, there will be no TV again. Again, if I wrote it, I'll be like, I don't have to explain this. Just walk away. There'll be no scene. But that's not how she should do it. But maybe she should just own up more to it.
Yeah. She doesn't have to walk away.
Go ahead.
I didn't mean to. I just was like, to build on that. She doesn't have to walk away. She can be like, fuck you. Like, don't criticize my past, whatever. She can do whatever she wants here. She's making a weak choice. She's trying to be amicable. She's trying to understand. Yeah. Like, Gina can be upset all she wants about someone else's infidelity. That's, as somebody said, like, largely her problem. I mean, it's great for drama. Like, I'm not complaining as a viewer, and like the stuff about him saying about Tamra, he wants to fuck her, whatever. I'm like, again, as a viewer, I enjoy it and I appreciate Tamra's work. She's a genius, but it's also, that's really neither here nor there for normal people. That was not when they were even together. That is not a controversy. But so Jen needs to toughen up and start playing in the big leagues. And I don't think she can, as you're saying, Craig.
And
I think like she's in a position where, like you said, she's making weak choices, and so the other women are picking up on this, and they're able to come in and make attacks that would otherwise require like them to expose a bit more vulnerability, like in the Housewives game, right? Like, by Gina dwelling on this affair and like getting so worked up about it, she is exposing a potential like attack point for Jen. If she was stronger at this, she could be like, yeah, so what? Why are you so affected by this? And really use it as a way to like come from, you go on the attack as opposed to like just curling up in a ball. And same with this thing with the like the comment about her boyfriend Ryan being like, oh yeah, I'm gonna fuck Tamra, like, that's another thing where that's an opportunity for Jen to be like, so what, like, what's the deal with Eddie? Why haven't you told him this? Like, you didn't bring this up until now, and it's because you didn't tell Eddie. Why are you worried about what Eddie thinks? That's nothing. Like, what's going on with you? Like, it's another opportunity for her to be on the attack. But I think, like, Tamra feels completely safe putting this out there because Jen is playing the game so weak. And same, I think Gina is a smart enough housewife that if she saw that, Jen was going to be making an attack on this, she would be able to cover it up a bit more and not play as like offensive a game as she has been. But Jen's just playing this so weak and just letting herself be torn apart.
I guess, like, in Jen's defense, because like there was a bit of hint that her story was inconsistent depending on who she was talking to. Maybe she was still trying to get the vibe or understand who her ally is or how much she can actually dispose in terms of information, that she had these inconsistencies. But again, like, it worked to her disadvantage because people were like, you're telling lies, your story isn't true, it's not consistent. And I didn't think about it in your lens, Craig, that like she could play offense if she just kind of just twists it a little bit. And if she just switched the narrative, I'm like, that's really smart. She should have totally done that, because then the attention would be off her and she can call out everyone else, and she would kind of gain that, she would gain the upper hand in these situations. I didn't watch the next episode, but it's going to be turning towards maybe a bit about Gina and her dealing with her own stuff. This next episode, they might just turn their attention away from her, and her camera time, like her screen time, will just be cut quite short. So,
yeah. I do want to get into the episode of Real Housewives of New York that we were talking, that we watched. Did you guys have any final thoughts on Real Housewives of Orange County before we move on?
My only final thought is a shout out to my favorite housewife of this show, Shannon, who is a natural born physical comedian, and her genius should be appreciated. I don't know. I just love watching her. I just like, she's so like, she just rolls with it. When they found an eyelash on her shirt, they found an extension hanging out of her hair, and she just did a whole little bit about it. And I just love her. I just really enjoy her. Yeah, that's all.
My final thought is that this episode should just be called IMBD. Because I just like, even as they were saying, because there's this whole mix up of, is it IMDb or IMBD, and even as I was watching, I'm like, wait, what is it? Like, I like just like couldn't go on that. Yeah. It's a good watch. I don't think it would be the franchise I would start with. I think I would want to get used to this like kind of world a little bit, but I'm not sure if I would immediately return to this franchise as my continuous watch.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment. I feel like it's just maybe not as it's not as like high stakes or high drama as some of the other franchises are. But there is a pretty good cast of characters, and also you've got some real legends that have been on this franchise, like Tamra and Vicky, who we're hopefully going to be seeing a bit later this season. Shannon as well. But I mean, there's been some great seasons of Orange County as well. So I want to move on to Real Housewives of New York. So the reboot, season 14, is coming out in a couple weeks on about a week from Sunday. We decided that we want to revisit an episode from season 8 of Real Housewives of New York, which is a fantastic season. Mostly I wanted to do this so that we would have some contrast between that and Real Housewives of Orange County, so for our discussion about the setting. But let's get into our highlights. Billy, what were your thoughts here?
My thoughts were, so I never experienced this tagline intro thing, and I didn't expect it to be like a thing, but I loved it in the beginning. It helped me like actually anchor the characters, and I'm assuming they must have maybe written that themselves a little bit to a certain degree. So I like in general just really loved that intro because it was like quite Power Ranger-y, like like Power Rangers, like like what the Red Ranger is about, what the Yellow Ranger is about. But you get like you get Jewel, who was a Jew and an Asian, walked into a bar and they had me, and I'm just like, I love that as a tagline. But I think my real highlight actually really was when they were in the art gallery, and there was this like complete like chaos that breaks out as the event rolls on, and the character Ray enters the scene and they confront each other. But just also understanding, like I think that the allyship in this episode was much more clear, like just to know who's on whose team, like what game they're playing. So I got into it a lot quicker. But generally a really good episode. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, this scene at Dorinda or John's dry cleaning event, I don't even really fully understand the context of this, because this was a very like swanky event for a dry cleaner to put on, and I guess he's the dry cleaner to the stars or something.
Oh, is that
like
what he does? I thought he created fashion for the stars, but sorry, that makes so much more sense.
He's a dry cleaner. Yeah.
That is so good.
And I love how he pointed out the stain on Dorinda's dress for her. That was rude.
Yes.
Not a nice thing to do.
But Dorinda loved it. Dorinda was like, that's why we're a perfect match, because I always have a stain on me. And like, hey, there's an innuendo there somewhere.
I had kind of forgotten about this dynamic with John in this season, and how people are so concerned about whether John is a good fit for Dorinda. on this season, especially like Ramona has some sort of issue with John. I feel like Bethany had some sort of issue with John. We didn't really see that during this episode, but yeah, I forgot about this dynamic, and so to see John on the screen again and just remember how kind of abrasive he actually is was really interesting. I don't think I took the same interest in him as a character when I initially watched this as I had when I was watching this episode this time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I totally agree. It was quite like stark. I was like, wow, this is absolutely unacceptable behavior. And I again, same Craig, I don't really remember thinking much about that in the past, but I mean, that being said, there's a lot of unacceptable behavior on the show and we love it, but yeah. I don't know, pretty aggressive.
He was quite explosive. I think like that's why it just stood out to me a little bit. But then there was this whole drama about the tipsy girl, skinny girl situation that was also happening in this episode. That was like pretty good to watch play out. I mean, I do wonder. I did wonder a little bit about. I think it's Sonya's past that she just came out from a Chapter 11 bankruptcy situation, and she just kind of like we just kind of like scrolled past that really fast. Like, wait, what happened? Like, what was her deal?
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure what the actual situation was with that, because I feel like if it was a personal bankruptcy, then, you know, she'd probably lose the house, right? Like, it seems like she wouldn't have the townhouse unless maybe that's part of like the Morgan family, that she doesn't actually own that outright, or there's some sort of holding company that owns it. I don't really understand the full details of it, but Sonia is definitely trying to like climb back up. She was part of the Morgan family. Like, Morgan is a last name that she married into and divorced and kept it, and that's like the Morgan family of like the JP Morgan.
Oh, so that's her trump card, right?
Yeah. So she is maintaining that sort of proximity to wealth and status,
or the association with it,
retaining retaining that last name after the divorce.
Do you I guess my question is, so she's trying to start a brand called Tipsy Girl, which is really similar to Bethany's brand, Skinny Girl, and they're both alcohol products. Do you buy Sonya's character? Or do you think she like knew what she was up to when she called her brand Tipsy Girl, or like do you think it literally was like she just thought it was cute and she just wanted to roll with it?
So I don't think she came up with the name. I feel like her business partners came up with the name, and I think they definitely knew what they were doing. I think Sonia, I don't know whether she put some thought into it. She plays the aloof character like extremely well. Like, there's almost no break in character. And I could be convinced that, you know, Sonia is 100% herself all the time, and this isn't like an exaggeration of her personality that we're seeing.
Right.
So it could be that she didn't know. But I also don't believe when she said that no one told her that this was close. Like, I don't believe that no one was like, oh, hey, you know, what's Bethany gonna think? Like, I don't believe that it didn't, you know, cross paths with her at some point.
One of my favorite lines in this episode is because of these of the two brands being so similar, eventually Sonia and Bethany were like in confrontation to talk about, you know, the similarities of this. And Bethany just told Sonia, you can't play stupid and smart at the same time. And like, that's actually a really great line. Just because I know those kind of people in my life where it's like, you can't play stupid when you want and smart when you want. And that's what I'm like, I feel like Sonia is doing this bullshit. And I don't know, like, I don't fall for it, but then I'm like, I like, you just came up from Chapter 11, so maybe it is really different. So like,
I don't know. I was thinking about this too, and I don't know that Sonia plays smart all that much. Like, I don't know that she pulls it off. Like, I tend to,
maybe she tries.
I tend to believe, as you said, Kurt, I think she is authentic. That's my best guess, because God, she's good. Like, I feel so sad for her when Bethany was berating her, and I think she's she's a level of delusional where you can bury things under the rug or keep your head in the sand, and you can keep believing a narrative you tell yourself that Bethany won't be mad about this. You might know deep down, but she's had a history of, as Bethany very well illustrated, many very obscure, weird, and ultimately failed businesses. So I love watching that storyline for her. She's such a fascinating character. She had a toaster oven that people are helping her do photo shoots and all these things. She has a soccer team. She has
she had a perfume. Apparently, I loved it when Bethany just railed into her and just listed her failed attempts. The toaster oven was fucking amazing. I was like, I need to look up your business ventures after this, because like they were non-continuous as a brand and they sound very rational, but I love them all.
Yeah, and she what she did always have was extreme confidence in every, as she talked about it, but it read as delusional, like very obviously, and everyone would comment on that.
Yes, yeah.
And she just never gave up on that narrative, but it was very consistent in its delusion. So she's like, I think she's consistent, and I think I believe her to an extent, but that entails a lot of delusion.
Yeah, I think she's definitely checked out and kind of structures her own kind of narrative to achieve her quote unquote success or what she needs to do. There was this one really sad moment where Bethany and Sonia were in conversation, or kind of more of an argument, and Bethany was questioning Sonia's distributors, like, who are you like distributing this with? And poor Sonia just like couldn't name one, and like, and she was like, like, I know people, and they know people, and and then Bethany's like, who? And then Sonia's like, like this dude. And it's like, who do you know? And just kind of like kept going at her. I'm like, oh, Sonia, like, just can you name one? Yeah. And I think she actually did name one, but it was like if I had to name like a soccer team, like I just Manchester Eagles. Like it was like just like you put a city and a name together. I'm like, oh, I feel bad for you. And it's kind of like, it was like, oh, but you know what you're doing, but like you're so bad at it. And, like,
exactly.
You're bad at being stupid smart, and you're bad at being smartly stupid. Like pick a lane.
Yeah. And she's so removed from like what it would take to actually operate this business and brand. She says like, we've got a lot of distributors that we're friends with. She refers to like those as friends as opposed to like actual like connections. Like, we're in discussion with these distributors. Like that. It's like, we're friends with these distributors.
Right. Like we are on Instagram. I follow them. Well, it comes back to a little bit to your early point where you talk a lot about the New York franchise being success via social ladder climbing and association. And I feel like Sonia is kind of a great example of that. That like we don't, at least for myself, I don't quite know what her strength is, but she tries to mingle her way to success, like by marrying or by kind of being associated with the right names or the right brands. But at some point, you have to kind of put in the work, right? And maybe that's what Sonia is missing a little bit. Like she wants to, but she doesn't know how, and she can only do it by emulating maybe Bethany's brand, Bethany's success, and then associating with that network or kind of adjacencies. Yeah. But she doesn't really know what she's all about. And so I think that's what's difficult for her to grasp, because I think she doesn't know what that is, and that is reality, is to like know what you want. So she's just like, I don't know what that is. It's going to be really hard for me to figure that out. I'd rather just live in this fantasy land and watch toaster oven and see where that goes. And let's see if I can like network my way into like being successful.
And I think one thing that's interesting with Sonia, like she is dealing with financial troubles, as we see, obviously at a scale of a very rich person, but she's trying. She thinks her salvation is in these businesses. She thinks the next business is really going to make it for her. And she's clinging to that in this desperate way that's interesting to watch, and you have compassion for her. And she clings to the Morgan name in the same way as we see in, I think it's later seasons, she is so desperate to cling to that identity. I don't think the Morgan family is particularly keen to have her involved in any way anymore. I think that's pretty clear from the show. But she has this scene. She has a scene in a future episode where they go visit like a historic house of the Morgan family, and there's these letters, and it's this like iconic quote she's like, "You don't touch the Morgan letters," because someone touched them, and it's just this like, it's such a compelling story. And she's just so desperate to make these things work, but they're not gonna. And
Yeah, I think like Sonia's like origin story is like she married into the very upper stratosphere, like at the edge of space, and as like exited and is now in a free fall. We're just seeing her operate in a free fall, and you know, sometimes when you're in a free fall, like if everything around you is falling as well, you just kind of seem like you're just like floating around in space and like anti-gravity, and that's really like what we're seeing with Sonia. I feel she's just kind of like floating through things, but everything around her is falling at the same rate as her, like this townhouse that she's like trying to maintain. She doesn't even have the heat on in like some places and she's just like just kind of like aloof and like just floating through space.
It would be kind of interesting to watch the show via the lens of how many arguments end up actually being conflict resolution or how many people just walk away. Because in this particular argument, Bethany just chose to say, like, I'm done with you. I don't want any of this anymore. I'm going to walk away. But being in New York, they had very limited space. So she just kind of walks towards like this corridor that's like not quite an office. Not like she didn't fully walk away. She's still very much in your sight line. She's like, I'm going to walk away. I'm going to walk over to this corner. And then like poor Sonia just has to go in and like try to get comfort by like the workers that were in the office. And she eventually just like exits via like an elevator and she has her head down. I'm like, I didn't think it was going to go this way. I'm like, oh, yeah, it's okay. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, we're getting to the end of things here. Did you guys have any final thoughts on this episode?
I really liked this episode. Like, I would definitely continue watching this whole series. I'm not sure how many seasons of New York there is, but in general, I think it's really well set up. There are a good amount of explosive characters that are kind of unpredictable. So I really liked it. And I had a good time. Like I had a really good time just like watching them go out and then just going to restaurants. Yeah, it was a good season.
Totally.
Yeah. And I highly recommend this. I highly recommend this season. It's got some excellent moments. There's another couple episodes that take place at Dorinda's Berkshire's house that are just truly iconic. It's my favorite Christmas special to watch. I watch it every year, so we'll hopefully highlight that this December.
I do have a question that, like, and sorry, I wonder if, like, and this must exist. Is there like a Super Housewives where they bring in like this kind of like Marvel universe of Housewives and they like throw them all together somewhere exotic and do a thing? There must be, right? Yes, okay.
Yeah, it's Real Housewives Ultimate Girls Trip is kind of the all-star game of Housewives.
Okay.
And worth checking out if you like don't follow the show, because especially on this most recent season, I think if you're interested in sort of the strategic element of like the actual like social game of it all, I think that is where it is the most visible.
Like played out.
Kind of see. That's where you can kind of see, because they are constrained within time. They play it as a game, and they're like manipulating the social situations in that way. So I would recommend, if that's like one of the, I think there's a lot of elements that could draw someone into Real Housewives. If strategy and that social game of it is what is compelling to you, then that is a great place to look for it.
I was just gonna say, one of the things I really liked, just to finish off, we saw a nice bit of Dorinda at the end of this episode. Dorinda Billy took a dark turn a few seasons later. She became very, very nasty, and she was fired for that.
Oh no!
Or at the same time as that, and
like nasty on the show.
Yeah, she was just attacking, especially this one character, Tinsley, and it just became like a not fun level of nasty. Like we can take some nasty on this show, but it became a bit much, and she needed a timeout. So I love her as a character, but we saw here it was nice to see the old Dorinda when she was like, she's strong, she doesn't take any shit, she will get in your face and yell at you. But it was like within a reasonable context, like within that fight. So I just felt it was really nice to see the old Dorinda. I think she even said, "I made it nice." One of her iconic quotes to Ramona as she screamed at her on the street. So that was really heartwarming. And you picked a great episode, Craig. It really hit a lot of the iconic stuff I love about New York. As I said, it's my favorite. It did need a reboot, but these characters, these core, the OGs of this show are absolutely amazing and will always like retain that status. So it's nice to watch these old ones, and I think I will also watch the next one that's queuing up for me.
So does reboot mean the characters come back on, or is it a whole new cast?
They've got a whole new cast that's coming on.
Got it. Okay.
There is apparently like an Ultimate Girls trip that is focused on the legacy New York characters.
Right.
But, if you watch the most recent season of New York, it was time. Like, it was definitely time to change things up.
Sure.
It needed to happen. And I think that the cast, just from what I have seen, on their Instagrams and the previews that we've got, I'm really looking forward to this. Like, I'm really excited to get to know this cast and see what they bring to the table, because I think it seems like there's some really interesting personalities on this cast.
Yeah. Amazing.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for doing this, Billy. Do you want to let everyone know where they can find you?
I only have a personal account that's public. It's Billy K Chung it's just Billy K Chung on Instagram. So BILLIKCHUNG, and that's where I am.
Awesome. Thanks so much. And Sandy, do you want to let everyone know where they can find you?
Sure. If you're interested in weird art and local museums, you can find me at Corporeal Curios, CORPOREALCURIOS. Even I can barely spell it, on Instagram.
But find her.
Or search my name.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. That's been Bravo Outsider for this week. You can find us online at bravooutsider.com. We're on YouTube. Look us up on Instagram or Threads at Bravo Outsider. We're on Twitter as well at Bravo_Outsider. And give us a rate and listen and subscribe anywhere you find podcasts. Until next week, keep on wifing.